Well, thank you all for having me. And again, I always create talks that I hope are practical, useful, and this is a new one. The parenting committee or the education committee asked me to kind of create a talk designed around parenting in the 20th century, parenting around anxiety, parenting around media use, parenting around friendship, and parenting overall. So a really large assortment of topics. So I decided, how do you conquer this? Well, you don't really conquer all these topics. You turn them into a cruise. So folks, we're going to go on a little cruise, meaning we're going to hit different parts and some of the key elements. And today, we're going to focus on sort of what we know around anxiety, what I live and breathe every day, and how to help basically parent in a way that doesn't reinforce and recreate anxiety and create more problems. Then we're going to take a little trip to social media and the use of social media around in this day and age. And then we're going to take a break, and you all will come back for part 2 around friendships and general advice. But we're going to kind of hit this stuff because there's a lot of information. So we are off to Spain. And Spain's my favorite country. And again, my kids, I have 3 of them. So they're really into football. They're really into food and adventure. So we're off to Spain. So every country we'll go to, we'll visit the national team for a minute. But this is the national team. This is Barcelona. But when I do try to create these things, I think about what the literature says, what's going on, and then I'll create a metaphor for what we're doing. So when you talk about anxious-free parenting, what I'm going to ask you to do is to use your SMARTS. And SMARTS being an acronym, and that acronym is to basically what you'll hear, and a lot of times when I talk to kids, we have an anxious brain and a smart brain, but helping you learn to better parent from a smart place. So SMART is an acronym, and you can follow along as we go. But the first part of the acronym is, what do we do unintentionally as parents that fuel the anxiety? Then we're going to talk about how you can model your own anxiety work. What are some of the key skills that kids should have and adults should have to help them tackle anxiety? How to better recognize it and have that alarm go off, because if we catch it early, it's easier to do something about. And then what we need to do to start making it more comfortable to talk about anxiety. So I'm going to pull in a Harry Potter reference and then get into what do we do about it, which we live in Colorado. So I'm going to teach you how to ski around anxiety. And we're going to do this all, by the way, in 20 minutes, because then we have to move to France. So with that in mind, we're going to jump right in. And the first thing about all the things we know to do as parents that might unintentionally fuel anxiety, they're going to ask you to stop doing. And my basketball coach growing up, so I played on this really great basketball team, that basically my basketball coach said the following to me, which I live by. He said, if you can do it wrong, you can do it right. But first you have to know what you're doing wrong. So that's where we're going to start more with what can you do wrong around anxiety. So here are all the things we know that we unintentionally do wrong as parents, and I'm going to go through each one just in order as they show up. So the first one, our generation of parenting, we are called the snowplows. And what do snowplows like to do? They want to pave the way and make it as easy as they can for their kids so they don't struggle. But the problem with that from an anxiety perspective is we're teaching our kids, we're not teaching them the skills of how to struggle and work through. We're basically making the path as smooth as possible, and the first time they start to encounter difficulty, they don't have the skills to deal with it. And they've learned that things shouldn't be hard. You've unintentionally taught them things should come easily. Things should happen easily. And so the snowplow kind of parenting actually doesn't help anxiety. It usually makes it worse. The next thing, kind of moving around, let's see if that works. We're going to move to post-analysis criticizing. So what that means is after any event, if all you do after the event is you talk about what didn't work. Oh, the outfit, I can't believe she wore that. Oh, the food was horrible. Oh, the food, whatever it was. If after an event you spend time criticizing, and during the event you look happy, you say all the right things, but then you leave and you criticize, that's teaching kids basically that there's always being judged and not to judge what people are saying, to stop kind of reflecting and listening in and kind of to know that people are having different experiences. So whenever you kind of leave an event, even today, and you said, oh, the parking was horrible, or those things, but when you walked in, you said, oh, great to be here, anxious kids in their brain are picking up on that. And they're picking up on, I can't trust what's really happening. And therefore, they're going to be more anxious in situations because there's a discrepancy between what they think is happening and what's happening underneath. Another big one that we know about in the literature, in the same way called snowplowing, but that's called accommodation. And accommodation is when we change environments so kids didn't have to be or don't have to be anxious, when we help them get out of things. And I'm going to share probably way too much here, but growing up, part of this work, I was a very anxious kid. And one of the things I was very anxious about, was using a public restroom. I couldn't go number 2 in a public restroom. And my parents were so lovely and awesome, and they didn't know better. So what do you think they did anytime I needed to go to a restroom? Take me home. So nice. They would even bring 2 cars to the restaurant because they also let me eat anything I want because they didn't want me to be upset. So of course I would overeat, have to go, and then one of them could drive me home. The problem with that, again, you're learning way too much about me, but the problem with that is, again, this anxious part of my brain that was worried about the bathroom never learned how to get over it. I learned I should avoid things I'm anxious about. And so therefore, whenever I felt anxious, my instinct is to avoid. And we always think we're helping when we accommodate, but you're never helping. You're kicking the can down the road, and you're making it harder in the future. The next thing is pretending that anxiety isn't there or it will go away, saying to your kids there's nothing to be anxious about. They're about to go into a big soccer game and they're saying, I'm worried. And you said, oh, you'll be fine. When you minimize or pretend it's not there, that's dismissing their anxiety experience, and it's not helping them realize that it's okay to be anxious. So pretending and then allowing in the same way accommodation is changing environments so your kids don't have to be anxious, letting your kids avoid things that make them anxious, letting them not have to do those things. If your kid doesn't like their English teacher, let's get them out of English. Because again, that thinks good in the moment and take out, but you're teaching your kids how to deal with their anxiety is by avoidance. Another big thing in the literature is when we are overly emotional and reactive to what kids tell us, that also seems to stoke anxiety. When kids are worried that you're a firecracker and you're always going to go off, they're going to be worried to approach you, to talk about things, and they're going to be more worried about how things go. The next one, I call it in the same way post-analysis criticizing, I call it anxiety priming. So anxiety priming, you've given all your kids genetically the gift of if you're anxious, you've passed that down genetically. Anxiety has a genetic component. But then, unintentionally as parents, we stoke that anxiety by always mentioning the danger that can happen. So you have a high schooler that's about to go to a party. What do you tell them? Tell them, don't pour your own drinks. Make sure, because it can be laced. You might tell them how to, don't talk to these people. Stay away from this. Don't drink and drive because you could die. You're going to tell them all the danger, all the bad things that can happen. But you're never balancing it with what can be fun. What's going to go well at the party? Maybe you might make a new friend. And so you're already giving them that genetic gift of anxiety, but then you're priming it constantly by just reminding about what to be anxious about. So the goal isn't to remove this. The goal is to start to bring a little more balance, to talk about both. And then the last thing, this might feel weird, but another thing we do as parents is whenever we give assurance around things, we're actually also stoking anxiety. When you say you'll be okay, things are going to go okay, they're learning that they need that assurance to be okay, and they're going to keep coming back to you for assurance. So one of the things we want to do with anxious kids is start to peel away those things. So I just went over a whole bunch of what not to do's, and it's a lot, and I put it all on the sheet. On the first page are a whole bunch of the not to do's, and then some small antidotes, not big ones, that you might start wanting to do if you recognize any of these practices in your own parenting. So take 2 minutes, go down the own list. If you see that's something you do in your own parenting, put a check, and then think about, based on the antidote, what could you start to do a little differently? So we're leaving in that way Barcelona, and we're making our way down the Mediterranean. We're still on anxiety pieces, but again, we talked about all you can do wrong, but what can you start to do right? Back to my basketball coach. So one of the first things is to model your own anxiety work. So on here are a whole bunch of things that make me very anxious. Going to the bathroom in public anymore, not so bad. I had to go, as I was saying, I joke, when you go to Europe and the best place is McDonald's to use the restroom, you start to get over that. But we'll talk about the skills, but here are things that really do make me anxious that my kids know. And they know I battle, and they know I conquer, and we all live with anxiety is something we conquer. It's not something we let win. And so I have a really bad airplane anxiety. My worry brain, and you'll hear that language, doesn't want to blow up on an airplane. That sounds really bad to it. So I fly, and I fly a lot. Making small talk, meeting new people, not so much, makes me anxious. I do it a lot. Sushi, fish. My anxiety hates fish, and it really does. So I have to eat salmon, I have to eat these things with my kids, and they know. And then speaking into a microphone. I give talks all the time. I don't like my voice, my anxious brain hates it, and I model that by speaking into microphones whenever I get the opportunity. But you gotta practice what you preach. If you don't want your kids to let anxiety rule their life, you can't let it rule your life. So that's one of the first things. And then what are these key skills that sort of help us fight anxiety? And this is a thing, it can be a whole talk, and I do a whole talk on anxiety and these skills in more depth. But just to let you know, that think of anxiety skills sort of like skiing. There's some basics you want to have. And you want to have them in these domains. And I've developed this model called learning to face your fears. And the first set of the skills is to learn how to better identify when you're anxious. You need to have the light bulb go off and go, oh, that's my worry brain. And then again, worry brain is there to keep you safe, but if it gets too strong, it takes over. So part of what that F is about is having skills that decrease your physiological arousal to get your smart brain back. So I could have put it in here, but if I threw a cobra in the middle of the room, Your anxious brain would take over, and you would make split-second decisions of what are you going to do. You would probably run out of the room, but if you did it and you were trapped, you would then figure out what are weapons. That's what anxiety is there for. But we do it in a very reactive way. And what we need to do is to slow that process down and have tools that get our smart brain back. So stuff like breathing, meditation, stretching, visualization, all those great calming tools are really effective things we need with anxiety to get our smart brain back. And that's this kind of F step. Then the next step is after we calm and get our smart brain back, then the work of anxiety begins, and it goes like this. We want to make it safe to identify and get comfortable talking about what our worry brain is telling us. So my anxiety tells me I'm going to blow up on the airplane. My anxiety tells me that I have to do certain safety behaviors, like I have to check what kind of passengers are on the plane, because God would never take kids, right? So if kids are on the plane, I'll be okay. So these are anxious thoughts that I have safety behaviors around, and you have to get comfortable as parents talking about your worry brain, letting your kids talk about theirs. You can throw out scenarios. You are all singing the national anthem tonight at the Nuggets game. What is your worry brain telling you right now about that experience? Getting comfortable talking about it. Then we need the ability to talk back to those worries, to challenge them. And that's what we work on with kids, calming, identifying worries, talking. But then we need skills that help us do. And some of the skills that help us do are about rehearsing, practicing, breaking things down to smaller parts. So anytime you have a kid that is doing something novel, not novel to you, novel to them. Their first soccer game, my kid just had their first science fair. I've done a million science fairs. It was their first. So anytime that's the case, breaking it down to smaller, chunkable steps. Think, what about Bob? Baby steps. Baby steps to the elevator, baby steps push the elevator. Oh, you don't know your What About Bob? A good movie, folks. 90s. Bill Murray, Richard Dreyfuss, good one. But learning to break it down are steps that help. So we want to have some skills that decrease arousal. We want to have some skills that, again, help us identify what we're worried about and talk back. And then we want to have some skills that help us do. Those seem to be important. And once kids have those, then just like we talk about with swimming or skiing or anything else, when your kids know how to ski, we'll talk about skiing. When your kids know how to ski, you got to get them on the mountain and keep pushing them. If they don't know how to ski, your first job is to make sure they have the tools. So thinking parent-wise, have I given them, do they have the tools to manage their anxiety? If they do, then we're going to start putting them in environments that make them work on it. If they don't, then we want to get them these tools either by learning ourselves or by coming or getting them help to help them better do. Just like I could never teach my kids to ski. I want them to. We live in Colorado. So I put them in ski school. Now that they have the basics, it's my job to keep putting them on the mountain over and over. And now they're better than me, and it's really fun, but sad too, that I can't keep up with my kids anymore. And they're only 10, 12, and 5. So that's really sad, the 5-year-old. But as we go on, so as we talk about it, those are the skills. And again, take a minute now back to the group. I know I'm going really fast. I only have 5 more minutes before we move on to the next topic. But take a minute, talk amongst yourselves. What's something that you could do a better job modeling your own anxiety and that people know you're fighting it by doing? And then 2, based on this brief, quick description of skills, what might be some of those things you might want to start doing and employing with your kids? Do I want to, in the car, Practice breathing. Do I want to, in the car, practice identifying worries and talking back to them? Do I want to, in the car, help them problem solve around what makes them anxious without avoiding? Do I want to rehearse with them? Oh, they have to go talk to the teacher about an assignment. They've been avoiding it. Let's rehearse that. Or they're in the dating age and the dance is around the corner and they have to ask someone to the dance. Can we practice that in the car? Can we do these things? So again, take a minute. What's something you could model better? And what's some skill that might be good to take back and inculcate into your parenting practice when you start talking with your kids? Talk amongst yourselves. So again, part of this idea is the more we can catch anxiety in the quicker and recognize it, the better it is to then intervene. In the same way, I'm from California. If I know, I'm from the land of earthquakes, so I know what an earthquake is, and I know what to do. They can still be scary, but imagine you didn't know what an earthquake was, and I brought you to California, and it's 3 a.m, and everything starts shaking and falling, and you have no word to describe the experience that's going to happen. What's going to happen in your brain? It's going to freak out. It's going to be, I'm dying here. That's what a panic attack actually is your body is having symptoms of anxiety and you don't have a word for the experience. So therefore, you're dying. You're having a heart attack. And therefore, your brain starts to react to that. So the more we can catch anxiety, and it falls under these 4 domains, it can fall under feelings, it can fall under our thoughts, can fall under our body or our reaction. That's what our brain is looking for input-wise. So again, I have 2 minutes. So first, just to know, whenever you hear the terms from either yourself or your kids, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, know that's happening, but there's also now their anxiety is probably going on, and part of anxiety is when it sees a cobra, it wants you to avoid. So anytime we're avoiding things or stressed, we're probably having an anxious experience. At the same time, another way to recognize it is in the thought process. Remember, anxiety by design, it's a cobra, or it sees cobra, it's going to tell you the threat and why to avoid. So whenever you see your child or yourself getting locked into something, thinking about that homework assignment in 3 days, or the SAT, or the college app, and you can't shake it, and all you're thinking about is that party, or what you're going to bring, your anxiety is starting to lock on, and we want you to have the light bulb, oh, I'm anxious. Because then we're going to use some of these skills to tackle it. Another one for you all that's really good, you all probably are highly effective people who make to-do lists and have a good organization system. If there is anything on your to-do list that has been there for more than 2 days, and you know you should have probably taken care of it by now, I want you to have that light bulb, oh, maybe anxiety is part of what's going on and getting me to avoid. So these are all some of the signs, and then in our body, anything related to fight or flight, but most people are going to experience that in their chest, their stomach, nauseous, headache, feeling warm when they're in the middle, because all those things related to what you want to do with a cobra get turned on. So again, we want to start to catch these things and help label it for our kids and label it for ourselves. And then once we know it's anxiety, then it must be conquered. It must not go unchecked. And once we do, part of that is back to that Harry Potter reference. We want to make it more comfortable, just like the Depression Center is trying to take back around depression. That's why it's our name. That's why we talk about depression. We want to talk about anxiety in the same way like Harry Potter. Everyone was scared of that guy Voldemort. So they wouldn't call him by his name. They would call him he who must not be named. But there were 2 people who said, no, not talking about him gives him more power and makes him stronger. We need to name him and talk about him, and his name is Voldemort. And anyone know their Harry Potter trivia? Who were the two people?
Harry Potter and Sirius.
Sirius maybe two, but there was one more. Harry Potter was one. Dumbledore was the other one who would call him, because again, we need to talk about Voldemort. And in the same way, part of this in Harry Potter, I love there's so many beautiful references to everything. But it was Harry's quest to fight Voldemort. But in the end, it took the whole community to actually defeat him. Everyone fought in the final battle to beat Voldemort. And sometimes with anxiety, it does take a community to fight. We can't necessarily do it alone, and being comfortable talking about it, accessing your community resources, accessing us to help with that fight. So we want to start talking about it, naming it, having tools to fight, and then start going back to this notion of skiing. And the skiing mindset is anything that makes us anxious is now something we have to conquer. And again, back to if they have the skills, we get them on the mountain. If they don't have the skills, we get them to the place to get them the skills. And when you think of skiing, we start with bunny runs, then we make it to blue runs, or green ones, then blues, then blacks, then double blacks, then extreme, then helicopter territory. I don't know if any of you made it up to the 17 inches. That was my birthday wish on Friday, and I couldn't get up. 70 was closed, so I could not ski. But what I mean by that when it comes to anxiety work, if your kid is anxious, let's say about talking or giving presentations, I want you to start thinking of constructing your own ski runs. First, do they have the skis to manage their anxiety? But if they do, what would be a bunny run, or this one I actually constructed around singing. So what would be a bunny run around singing? So a bunny run might be watching singing fails on YouTube. Just watching people do horribly singing. You don't have to sing yourself. Then it might be singing in the shower with no one around, just getting comfortable singing yourself. Then singing Happy Birthday at dinner might be a green run. Then singing Twinkle Twinkle at dinner. And you can vary the environments. Then maybe it's going to the restaurant, not just at dinner time at your house, but now we're doing it outside the house. And we're moving up to a double black run, might be singing the national anthem at the Nuggets game. And if you can ski a double black run, then if all you had to do was blue runs, it starts to get easier. So the fancy term for this and the work we do around anxiety, which is different, is it's called exposure work. And this is what's called a hierarchy, where you're building that ski run of helping kids get over what it is that makes them anxious. You're not accommodating, you're not avoiding, you're getting them on the mountain and doing. So this is also the work I'm doing with school districts and things, is helping them start thinking more about skiing and designing environments that help your kids get on the mountain and doing, and giving them the skills they need. So I know this is a big primer. I've already gone over my allotment in Spain. It's just too much fun. I could do I give talks for days on this. We're going to move to France in a minute. But if the problems seem to be getting worse, if you see more avoidance, but if you really see anxiety taking away from your kids' quality of life, that's where we want to get involved. Anxiety took so much of my life away when I was a kid. That's why I've dedicated my life to not letting that happen for others. And when I went to therapy, I had a great therapist who really helped me, again, have a good relationship, but he didn't understand what we know now about anxiety. And so I had a great relationship, but I had to figure this stuff out all on my own. And so I developed this to not have to make other people deal. And this is the stuff you can do and give them. And then if safety issues are around, because anxiety can feel so horrible every day to wake up and debilitating, we want to be involved. Take a minute and based on what you just heard, share with the person next to you, all been doing great. Where should we be talking about Voldemort in my own family? Where are we recognizing that anxiety might be inhibiting some of the things either I'm doing or my kid, kind of what you said, modeling for yourself, but where should we be talking about it? And where could I start doing a better job thinking about creating a ski run? Oh, my kid won't play sports. So what's my ski run? How am I going to get them playing competitive sports if that's what they want to do, but it's getting in the way? Oh, my kid can't do, they want to sing or they want to act, but they can't because their anxiety is too bad. Oh, my kid wants to, whatever it is they might want, but anxiety is stopping them. Where am I going to start developing ski runs and doing? My kid, I'll give one more example of this from my own life. So my own kid has presentation anxiety, and in August, she has to give a bat mitzvah, which is standing in front of a whole congregation and doing prayers in front of everyone. I had no idea how anxious she was about this till we went to the first meeting. And so I had to teach her all these skills. And now every week at dinner, she has to get up and give a 2-minute talk on a random topic, just to practice. And she has to go up to strangers at restaurants and start doing this. And if you think, and then we're going to go to temple and go early and start practicing, we're going to record this stuff. We have 5 months. But we're working on this, and she's working on it. And guess what's happening? She's getting more confident. Doesn't seem as daunting anymore. So take 2 minutes, talk amongst yourselves. What is going to be your ski runs? And also, where is it that you might want to start to develop this and talk more about anxiety and what you learned here today? Talk amongst yourselves. And feel free, I say this to all the parents I work with, feel free to make me the bad guy. I went to this talk and I learned something that I'm not helping you in the long run. And therefore, we're going to start working on this in a different way and blame me. It's not you. You're just following orders. Your orders is to help break anxiety. And so blame me. I'm happy to be the bad guy to help you start to do this more. But now we're going to move to another big topic with parenting, and that's screen time. So again, in the same way, thinking about reading the literature, talking with colleagues, what is it that I want you to take home from this, and then turning it into an acronym. And so I want you to have a screen plan. So again, the first thing about a good screen plan, and the biggest thing about parenting, you gotta practice what you preach. You gotta, again, you can't say, and it can't be just one of you. You're parenting probably as a team, and if one of you is modeling it but the other person doesn't, that doesn't work very well. So it starts with you and your partner getting on the same page and setting that example. Then we're going to talk about what are some of the core concepts to think about to have a conversation more around screen use. Then from there, let that develop into a contract that we're going to want to enforce and evaluate. And then what are the things we want to think about and finding the balance? So I'm calling that nailing the sweet spot. So let's dive in really fast. About 7 minutes, and I wanted 30 for my time. So I am poor with my time management. I apologize. But the first thing we already talked about, children don't listen, they watch. So if you are talking about better cell phone use and not modeling it, they're picking on that. They're picking that up. So again, whatever you're asking them to be accountable to, you can model it by showing them. You can pull up, most of us in here might have iPhones now. They can look and see your use, and I would encourage you to be transparent. How are you using your phone? The next, one of the kind of core concepts to think about The first core concept is when we're talking about screen time, let's get on the same page with the definition of screen time. So here's what I mean by that. If you have homework that you have to do on your laptop or computer, is that screen time? I don't know. Is watching TV screen time? Is video game playing with friends screen time? That's playing with friends. Is that screen time? So when we're talking about this, first off, do we have a shared definition for what that should be? And I'm not saying there's a right definition. I'm saying get on the same page of a definition. Define it together. The next thing about that is concept number 2. Think of the internet and screens as a tool. And because it's a tool, tools can be used for good or evil. Exercise is a tool. Food is a tool. You can use it in all different ways. So to start thinking about what is the purpose of this tool? Why do we have the internet? What are the good ways to use it? Is it really a necessary thing? Is it a reward? Is it a combination? But a big one to understand from an addiction place, anytime we use any tool as a way to cope with our emotions, it's much more likely to be abused or have negative results. If I drink alcohol because I had a rough day to take the edge off, it's much more likely going to be an issue than if I'm just using it for pure social entertainment or fun. But when I wind up using something as a means to cope, it's more likely to be abused. So thinking about that too. And then to also think about this idea that every choice we make, there are good parts and bad parts, but there are what are called opportunity costs. When I spend time on my device, what am I not doing? Where could I also spend that energy? And then understanding that there are generational beliefs that are different, that your kids have a different belief about the internet than you might, or even screens. You might see it as a distraction from their life. They might believe it's an augmentation, that it makes their life better. And so to talk about some of these generational beliefs and values. So that's concept number 2, is again, to help start guiding these conversations, but we want to have conversations. The third thing that, again, I always get his name wrong, but we went to a great talk on screen use 2 years ago at the Depression Center. They have an annual luncheon. And I'm blanking on his name, Nir what? Nir Eyal talked about, and I love this concept, so I'm borrowing from him and want to give him credit. But he talked about that someday we will probably look at screen use like we did as cigarette smoking. It's a new tool. It is introduced with no rules. We have no idea what's really great about it, what's not. There's no rules. People used to smoke in restaurants, bars, everywhere. There was nothing. And then we learned some things about it. And it's a new frontier that we don't know enough about. So part of the beauty of it's a new frontier is there's no prescribed rules. So the benefit is you get to make up the rules. You get to decide those things, but you want to start having those conversations. When is it okay to smoke? If we think of it like that. When is it okay to smoke and when is it not okay? What's okay to post in this new frontier and not post? Because again, kids don't have that concept yet of the internet lasting forever, and they don't necessarily know what forever means. And what they post now, they might not want an employer seeing 5 years from now when they apply for a job. They might not get that. So part of that is talking about and helping set that regulations. Just in the same way, I don't think any of you has a kid under 12, gives them wine at dinner and says, here, go for it. You set boundaries and rules about it. You talk about it. You have rules. Again, not maybe on a celebratory or something. I'm not saying that, but you talk about it. when and where. And then 2, part of this in this new frontier is talking about how do I talk about my beliefs with others in a healthy way. So how do I tell my friends that in this house when we come we put our phones down? We don't use our phones. Or how do we, if we go out to a party and everyone's on their phone and your kid doesn't want to, just like if everyone's doing pot and hands them pot, how do they say, no, I don't want to do that? To have some of those conversations in this new frontier, how do I communicate my own values in a way that feel right? So thinking of these concepts, and again, knowing what the guidelines are is the 4th, you have them all, but it varies about that. So thinking about even for yourself, are you under 2 hours a day? Are you under 2 hours a day of your, whatever you define as screen time, are you under that? If that's where you want your kids to be, are you modeling it? So taking all that, then leading to having conversations and guided conversations with your kids based on that. And talking about this stuff and thinking of these concepts in your head. How are they using this tool? Again, and every kid's a little different. My daughter is great. She polices herself. She doesn't really want to be on it. She's the oldest, 12. My son, he's 10. He wants to be on it all the time. He's texting his friends already at 10. My uncle, my brother, his uncle gave him a phone. We wouldn't have done it yet. But we did. We opened the frontier. So now we have conversations around healthy ways and limits, and we're talking about all this stuff. So you want to have these conversations. You want to also be comfortable setting limits around that because there's this unregulated age. And then hopefully have this turn into a contract. And I would say this is what you want to have in the contract. When, where, how much, and how we use. Have we talked about that? Have we clearly communicated that so that if I brought any of your kids in there and I asked them, can you tell me what's your parents say about when it's okay, when it's not okay, how much, what's okay to be on, where to go? Could they communicate that? If they can't, you have more work to do. So let's get clear on what it is, and then have we communicated it, and then do our children understand what happens? Do we have in place what happens when you violate the contract? So that's one thing about parents. We usually come up with the consequences after, but set them up before. So then you're just enforcing, you're not coming up with it as you go. Create a contract. And then come up with how often do we enforce the contract. Okay, every Sunday, let's sit down. I'm going to look at your average screen time. It needs to be under this. I can't see any use of this. No Facebook. But if you're doing this with your friends and that's what you do, great. Can I look at your text? Whatever that is, every Sunday or whatever it's going to be, let's come up with that. And how can we check in over time? Because it's going to change as your kids get older. What's okay is going to change by age. In the same way like anything else, alcohol, pot, you name it. And then the last thing, I have 2 minutes, but there is some things you want to balance and find. So the story of the 3 little pigs. What's the right amount of energy to put in for what we want to accomplish? So here are some things you want to balance. Back to anxiety. Are we seeing some of the positives and good the internet can do? And I'll give you one from an anxiety perspective. So I was very socially anxious. And one of the other things I had a hard time was potentially being flirting. So if I wanted to learn how to flirt when I was growing up, I'd have to go to the library, look up books on how to flirt, talk to the librarian about this really concept, find the books, and then read. What do kids get to do today about anything they're anxious about? Google. They have the Google. That is such a beautiful gift that they can learn anything at their fingertips. That's a positive. Can we talk about the positive ways to use it, the benefits? And can we also put in place areas that might go wrong, the concept of harm reduction? Can we put in place already things that might go wrong and have either controls and different things that balance that positive with the danger. So talking about what can go wrong at the party, but also what can go right, and thinking through how to do that in a safe way. The two is helping navigate the sweet spot between letting the internet be a place in social media where they express themselves, they show that side of themselves, but also the sweet spot to understanding that it's also a evaluative tool that later could be used against them in different parts of their life, and how to balance that in a healthy way. And then the third is balancing the fact that all kids already think they're adults, and they think they know it all and they got it all, with where they're really at, and balancing how to help them feel autonomous and feel independent like they can, but they really don't know enough and they don't have the brain capacity to, trying to balance that sweet spot. Not easy to do, but that's some of the things. So again, if problems seem to be getting worse with internet use, and especially if you see it as a reliance on trying to take care of their emotions, and you're finding them pulling away from activities and not using it in healthy ways, that might be a time to seek help, to get someone involved, to help break some of those negative cycles. If you're worried about how they're using it and they're doing it very recklessly in safety, these are all things you might want to consult us about, talk to us about, and get some help. So in one last minute, I would have given you more time, but again, a lot of this would have been interactive. Start thinking about a screen plan. But I gave you a lot to digest in 55 minutes. We took a really fast cruise, and there's more to the cruise next time you come around friendships and general parenting. But I do like to believe that some learning occurred today, and what helps me feel like that, I call it the stoplight model. So I'm going to ask one parent or person in the room to share something that, based on today, a red light got out of order, is something you're going to stop doing with your parenting. That you're going to learn from here and go, I'm going to stop doing this either with screens or anxiety. Then one thing that's a yellow light, pat yourself on the back. I'm going to keep doing that. I'm glad I learned and heard it again. And then one thing you're going to start doing based on today. You don't have to share all three, but can one parent share something that they're going to stop doing based on the talk today? A red light. Thank you. Awesome. So that anxiety priming. Thank you. One thing someone's going to keep doing. Kudos to you. You're doing great. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Keep pushing them in the way that, especially if it's coming from an anxious place, not letting them avoid. Awesome. Something someone might start doing based on the conversation today. Beautiful. So if you didn't hear, talking more about the opportunity costs when you're spending that time doing your internet use, how else you could have been using it that you might have felt even better about. So we have time for 3 to 4 minutes of questions. My name is on there. If you need and we don't get to it today, feel free to email me. Again, part of our program, we're called the family side, or the kid and teen program, we call it the family program for a reason, because we believe in the concept of family and we take care of our family. You're all in this room and we want to help in any way we can, so think of us like your family to help. So we have a couple minutes for questions, and I would encourage you to go through. I left you with conversations, things to think about, everything from the talk, and if you have some time, go through it and think a little more about how you might use that in your parenting, either around screens or anxiety. Yes, question?
Yeah, tackle that.
Beautiful. So the question, if you couldn't hear it, was how to especially facilitate these conversations, maybe with an older adolescent who may have some shame or has learned not to talk about Voldemort and doesn't want to talk about it with me. Or potentially, so it could be with me or overall. And the first thing I would say is I always would introduce it, I learned something. I went to this talk today, I learned it's important that we start talking about this stuff. And so my wish is I'm going to do a better job modeling it myself, But I think it's important that we start to do this in the conversation, just in the same way you might do it around your kids still have to brush their teeth, even if they don't want to or it's uncomfortable. But you can also ask them, I would say, is there anything I can do to help make that conversation easier to do? We are going to have the conversation, we need to start to, but is there anything I do that makes it hard to? So if you are overreactive, if you then get really self-conscious and anxious yourself, and then they tell you something they're worried about, that's my Jewish mother, by the way. So you tell her one thing you're anxious about. I've been worried about you for days. I've been thinking about you. Why haven't you called? I wanted to know and make sure you're okay because you told me you were worried about this. So I don't want to tell her anything because even though we want to talk about anxiety, I have to look and kind of name it for her. That there are things you might be doing unintentionally to stoke. So asking that question, but also just making it more part of the everyday vernacular and not such a big thing might be another suggestion as well. Great question. We have time for one more because I want to respect your time. So I'll stick around, but yes. So back to my language, what I would say, you want to acknowledge, sounds like your worry brain is firing and telling you that you're going to die. I hear your worry brain, and eventually coaching kids to talk back to their own worry brain, but saying, what could you say back to that worry? And helping, if they don't know, that's where it can come in and teach some of these things that they can say back. But again, acknowledging it in that, yes, this is, your worry brain is firing right now. You are feeling a cobra in the room, even though I don't see a cobra. And help balance that by acknowledging their experience that yes, but we are going to help you see that it's really not a cobra and you can do it. And so that would kind of be the language. I would just, again, externalize the anxiety. I hear your worry brain's really firing. I hear what it's telling you. I'm glad you're sharing it. But we need to talk back to that. Just because you're sick doesn't mean you're dying. Just because what you saw on TV doesn't mean it's real and going to happen to you. But ideally, you're having them do that for themselves by saying, what can you say back to that worry? How can you talk back to it? And the other piece of this, remember, because this is a skill, when they're anxious, think of it kind of like I coach my kids soccer. Think of the when they're actually anxious as the game itself, and think about the time when they're not anxious as practice. So if they show up in a game and they're anxious, and you haven't practiced this with them, that's not going to go well in the game. If I haven't worked on throw-ins in practice, when we get to the game, they're not going to throw it in. So I also have to back up my parenting and practice this more. And then when they're in the game, then we execute what we've been practicing. So that might be another little tip too, is that balancing the acknowledgement, but also reinforcing the need for more practice and doing that more. And my favorite time, in the car, you have a captive audience. If you are not capitalizing your time in the car, you're missing out. And I know it would be so much more fun just to listen to music, to do anything, but if you're not using that to practice skills, my 5-year-old knows we do math, we do English, we do worry brain practice, then we can relax and have some fun. So imagine me as your parent. I'm kind of a pain in the butt. But again, we're working on this stuff. You all have been fabulous. I will leave my cards if you just want any privacy things or anything. You have my email on there. You've been a great audience. Thank you for taking this little cruise with me. We're going to have the second part of the cruise where we talk about friendships and parenting in general in a couple months. And if there's any more you want to read, come on back.